an ancient Greek festival which involved women dancing and drinking on rooftops, lettuce, and a tragic romance. This was the Adonia, and here's a bit about it. I'll begin with the man of the hour, as it were, Adonis. So you might be aware of Aphrodite and Adonis. What essentially occurs is that Aphrodite falls in love with him. He's immortal, so you probably know where this is going. And whilst he's out hunting one day, he is gored by a bull, and he doesn't survive. And Aphrodite is heartbroken. There's a really interesting element to this myth and the festival that connects it to the east, that is to say, the lands of Mesopotamia. Some of you might be aware that Aphrodite wasn't formed in a vacuum, much like any of the other Greek gods. She was a sort of cultural response to other cultures and their sort of pantheons, as it were. And in Mesopotamia, we have a couple of goddesses who are often linked to her, a sort of precursor to what the Greeks formed Aphrodite from. And these goddesses were Inanna and Astarte. There is a myth of Inanna or Astarte, which does involve a sort of consort, lover, call him what you want, who unfortunately doesn't make it and is mourned. And what's interesting here is the wordplay. So you think of Adonis and you think of a Greek word. Well, it's thought that the word actually came from a word belonging to the sort of Mesopotamian languages that meant my lord. And that's particularly relevant here when you're thinking of a funeral, because it's thought that the lamentations would have been sung to my lord, and my lord translated roughly on the lines of Adon. So it's thought that Adonis comes from that. But it's not just there that we find these links. As I said, there's the festival bit, which I'll come to in a moment, but also what seems to be a myth that's been picked up and reinterpreted in the ancient Greek sort of pantheon, as it were, where you have a goddess losing a mortal and mourning heavily for him. Now, let's get to the festival and some of those elements, which I think are quite fun. There's a lot going on here, which I'll get to in a moment. But essentially, the way that the festival manifested was that women of all levels of society, so slaves, other types of women, I don't know if I can say the word on here, you probably understand what I mean, would all get on ladders, as you can see on here, and go on the rooftops where they'd spend all night lamenting Adonis by singing, dancing, and apparently drinking as well. What's worth noting here is that it wasn't a state festival. So there was no overarching priest here. It was just up to the women. So I'm not exactly sure how it was organized. The actual date of it is debated. It's thought that it would be early spring or early summer. And that's because of what the women apparently took up to the rooftops. Apart from presumably the wine, they took up seedlings, specifically seedlings of lettuce and fennel. And you might think that's very specific. Well, apparently, according to the myth, Aphrodite laid out the body of Adonis on a bed of lettuce as he lay, well, you can guess the rest, in not a good state, as it were. And so this is what they were trying to do. And they brought up these sort of broken pieces of pot, so ostraka, where we get ostracism from. And apparently they have seedlings of fennel and lettuce in these that had just started to grow. And these would be left on the roof. And the idea was they would wilt. They weren't there to grow anything substantial. And there's been a lot of debate about the symbolism. And it's thought that they weren't meant to survive. The whole idea was just like Adonis, who passed away too quickly, so would these sort of plants. Now, back to that point that I made earlier about how the Mesopotamian element of this manifested in the festival. It was on the rooftops. Things going on rooftops isn't that usual. And it's been argued that this is actually something that was brought across from the practice of the Canaanites or the various peoples of Mesopotamia. And I say Canaanites because there's actually a passage in Jeremiah in the Old Testament, and it discusses how the Canaanites celebrated their festivals to their gods. I think it says Baal on the rooftops. And apparently this is quite a common thing. It didn't happen all the time, but the idea was that you could celebrate rituals towards the gods in Mesopotamia in rooftops. And it's thought that this was something that carried across and became an established part of the festival. I mean, it can't have been that safe, can it? You had a bunch of women all night dancing and drinking on a rooftop. Yeah, that's got to have come at a cost. And that's what you see on this vase. That's what's being referred to here. So you've got a woman who's walking possibly down a ladder after perhaps being on the roof, or perhaps she's going up on it. And you've got Eros on the top right there, who's obviously an association of Aphrodite. And you've got what is in fact Pan on the far top left there. And you might think to yourself, well, what's he doing there? Well, it might be that this was a little nod and a wink, as it were, to Dionysus, because after all, there was wine involved. And you've also got women around her, and these women are dancing. One woman there is holding an incense burner. So again, you get this whole idea of there being a festival, lots of action, lots of dancing. So again, it seems like it was a very entertaining festival. And in fact, in Aristophanes' Lysistrata, we have reference to it being very noisy. So there was obviously something that was very popular. It was a chance for women of all social classes to mingle, and perhaps it had a cathartic element to it, because obviously they'd be mourning Adonis, but perhaps they were mourning people who were far closer to them that they had lost, perhaps in the months or years previous to it. One final point is this shows the elasticity of the Greek religious experience. It shows just how porous Greek culture was in adapting outside cultures, in importing them and expressing them the way that the Greeks could do best. And if that meant a bunch of women going up on roofs and dancing and singing and getting drunk, why not?